I'm very grateful to be here with you, and it's been such a great meeting so far. I'm going to introduce maybe another dimension. I'm going to talk about the spatial dimension of poverty. We've talked a bit about the change in the income distribution, where you see the green line is the bottom 50%, the share of income that goes to the bottom 50%, and that has declined substantially since since the 70s, and the top 1% has seen a dramatic increase in its share of the total income distribution. But that's all just measured at the family level, at the household level. I'm going to talk about neighborhoods. So we're talking about the child, the family, and now I'm bringing in the neighborhoods.
But Paul, excuse me, just to underscore, just for people to see, go back for one, I'd like people to just reflect on that for one moment. The red line is the top 1% of the population, 22% of US GDP right now. So 1% takes home 22% of national income.
That's
the green or turquoise line is the bottom 50. Is that right?
Yes.
50%. Less than the 1% is the bottom 50%. So it's a drama.
So
really,
if anyone tells you that we can't redistribute income, tell them, no, we just did.
Yeah.
We did a lot of redistribution already. So
as Warren Buffett said, yes, we do have a class war. The rich are waging war on the poor, and we're winning. So.
Okay, no, thank you. I worried about the 5 minutes, so I was rushing.
Sorry, that's not your time. That's my time.
Reclaiming my time, as they say in Congress.
Yes. All time reserved.
Yeah, this is Camden, New Jersey, where I teach. And as you can see, the housing conditions there are truly dreadful. And any child raised in this neighborhood, you could well imagine how horrible it would be. The violence is constant. There was a couple of years ago, there were 87 young men who were between 14 and 21 who all were killed in 1 year in the drug business, basically. And there's another picture of some houses that people were squatting in. It was truly a dreadful situation. Here's another picture of a neighborhood in Baltimore. Baltimore was made famous by the television series The Wire, which you may have seen. These kinds of conditions have real effects. There's been some really good research on how much of a difference it makes. 30% children who are moved out of those kind of a neighborhood into a lower poverty neighborhood, controlling for the family's income, not being in that neighborhood that was that poor, resulted in, when they got into a lower poverty neighborhood, 31% higher earnings as adults, $300,000 in income over the course of their lifetime, more college attendance, higher quality colleges, more likely to be married, less likely to go to jail. There's a huge consequences of living in such a high poverty neighborhood as the ones I was showing you. Unfortunately, in the United States, what you see is, this slide is not quite working for some reason. Well, I'll just tell you that there was a dramatic increase in the extent to which cities were high poverty between 2000 and a more recent period that I looked at when I looked at the data. There was about a 30 or 40% increase in the number of families, and therefore probably even more than that if you look at children who were living in neighborhoods where the poverty rate was at least 40%. And so that's like some of the pictures that I showed you. That also happened in, this one looked a little better. There's still some missing areas for some reason, but you could see the expansion between the year 2000 and roughly around 2010 in the number of the red zones, the high poverty neighborhoods. Now also, it was not just the central cities, which are indicated by the yellow lines, but starting to actually go into the older inner ring suburbs as well. So that extent of poor neighborhoods dramatically increased, and two things were driving it. And I call these the architecture of segregation. We have racial segregation and segregation by income. So first, I'll just show you this. I'm glad this one came out well. This is a map in which every dot is one household, and the green dots are African American, and the bluish dots are white households. It's fairly dramatic. There's not overlap. It goes from most of the neighborhoods in Detroit were either all white were all black. And that line that you can see is the actual city boundary of Detroit. I mean, you could see the map in terms of the demography of the households. You could see the boundaries of the city. So it's very striking. Now, Detroit is one of the most segregated cities, but there are a number of cities that are almost as segregated. Milwaukee, Philadelphia, New York, and so forth have very high levels of racial segregation. And we haven't talked a lot about race here, but it's a big part of the story in the United States. And then the second question is economic segregation. And of course, income is a continuous variable, unlike race, so we don't have just a couple of categories. So I'm measuring, I'm looking at the inequality of neighborhoods. That's the red line. And the inequality of households is the blue line. Starting in about 1980, you see a dramatic increase in income inequality among households. Well, we already know that. We've been hearing about that earlier. But neighborhood inequality, also measured by the Gini coefficient, increased much faster than household inequality. And mathematically, what that means is that not only was there more inequality to go around, but people were sorting to a higher degree than they were previously. So they're putting more effort into, they don't love their neighbor, they're trying to get away from their neighbor, put it that way. So we see that this is the summary for 264 metropolitan areas in the United States, but there are different stories in different places. So these four maps, the two on the left are Phoenix and Philadelphia, and those were places that were the most common pattern. That is, neighborhoods became unequal much faster than households. If you look at the two metropolitan areas that are on the right, one is Denver and the other one is Minneapolis, they also had increasing neighborhood inequality, but only because they had more income inequality. That was happening everywhere. That was driven by national globalization, macroeconomic policy, things that mayors of cities couldn't do much about. What they could do, what those mayors and local officials could do, was they could determine where houses were built. Every housing unit built gets a building permit. There's zoning, everything is controlled. So they have control over that. And in Denver and in Minneapolis, they made sure that affordable housing was widely available and that people couldn't just escape and create high poverty enclaves. Low poverty enclaves and leave everyone else behind. And that had a very dramatic effect in those two metropolitan areas. And there's several others, but those are the two largest that really made a difference. So it's possible to stop the growth of high poverty neighborhoods if you actually worry about zoning, where affordable housing is built, and those kinds of things. I'll show you sort of the pattern in Detroit. And again, somehow Detroit, the entire area of Detroit is red, and red in this graph and this chart means that the population declined at least 20% between 1970 and 2000. So people were leaving in large numbers. The suburbs were building new housing units, and they were building them so fast that it was cannibalistic and parasitic. They were taking houses out of the central city and also out of the inner ring suburbs, the area outside of the yellow line there that around Detroit. So the newer, richer suburbs were really just exploding, and they weren't just taking anybody. They were using exclusionary zoning to build places that looked like this, where you have all high income housing that's only affordable to mostly to non-Hispanic white households with considerable income. And here's a picture of Las Vegas, where they're building right to the edge of the desert. Again, all very high cost housing. Environmentally, this is terrible, but I'm not even going to get into that. But nevertheless, this is the pattern that was being done in so many cities, resulting in the inner city declining, the older suburbs declining, and lower income people being left behind in neighborhoods that were increasingly desperate. So, basically, what I'm trying to say here is that these things were not random. This is not just a market. This is driven by policy. And, on the non-spatial side, income inequality was determined by macroeconomics and globalization and so forth. But we can combat that on the front end by human capital investments. And then you can adjust the income distribution on the back end with some of the things that we just heard about and have been hearing about all day. The spatial dimension, we have a lot more power because the distribution of housing units is almost completely determined by policy decisions. Now it's determined by lots of small jurisdictions, the state could exercise more authority there if it chose to. The federal government kind of has a hard time working in this area because of federalism in the United States, but states could do this if they wanted to. So, so land use policy, zoning, planning, growth management, mortgage lending, all of these things could be used to establish less inequality between neighborhoods. So my basic point is that we have to return to this idea of unity. Okay, so we're getting a message from above. I feel like that's an endorsement. We have when you look at poor neighborhoods, people tend to think, what's wrong with that neighborhood? How did that neighborhood get to be so poor? Why are those people so lazy, or whatever they want to say about it? Or why do they have such dilapidated housing? The problem is, the problem did not start in that neighborhood. It started in the suburban periphery. It started with exclusionary zoning. It started with a whole host of policies that led those neighborhoods to be the residual. They're the tail end of a distribution of neighborhoods that has that at one end is extremely rich neighborhoods, and at the other end has very poor neighborhoods. So we have to take that into account. And so I say the fundamental question is not how do we fix Camden and Detroit, but how do we change the economic system and the metropolitan development paradigm that we have that created those places, Camdens and Detroits in the first place. So if we can do that, we can dismantle the architecture of segregation. So thank you for listening.